Next on Imágenes, our diversity and our health. Does that traditional homemade flan have you thinking you are gordito y saludable or fat and healthy? Saludos, I'm Miguel Perez. I don't know about you, but I may order some Chinese today, go for rice and beans tomorrow, send for a pizza the next day, cook meat and potatoes the day after that, and later, who knows, maybe some kind of junk fast food. Every ethnic group has some healthy dietary habits and some that defy logic. In a diverse society such as ours, at a time when we cherish the rich variety of our foods, it is also wise to look out for some dishes containing ingredients that could be dangerous to our health. We should make sure the stuff in the so-called melting pot is melting well in our stomachs. We have to learn to look out for each other, and that's why we've convened a panel of experts from different backgrounds to tell us how we as a diverse society can live healthier lives. Dr. Rodrigo Cárdenas is the founder and publisher of La Salud Hispana magazine. Dr. Shashi Agarwal is the chairman of the Asian American Heritage Council. Laura Lagano is a member of the Dietetic Association of New Jersey and the United States Dietetic Association. And Lori Ensaya Jefferson is a research scientist and consultant on the cultural affairs of New Jersey and the Department of Health of New Jersey. Welcome all to the program. It's a pleasure having you here. Is it true that we really are what we eat? That's what the saying says. And how significant is that?
Well, I mean, in reality, obesity is a big issue in the United States, and obviously, our culture teaches us as children that we have to eat a lot in order for us to look healthy. But research shows that if we eat wrong, these diseases will develop at a later time. So we are really heading for what we're eating.
Mm-hmm. But then, you know, you have in the Hispanic community, I mentioned in the introduction, that sometimes we say, well, it don't matter what we eat as long as it fattens us, as if fattening was good. And I guess it's a cultural thing from society to society, or from ethnic group to ethnic group, how we look at overweight people. Tell me about that, Lori.
I think you're absolutely right. When I was growing up, I was relatively thin, and I remember my grandfather and grandmother saying, girl, you better eat. Come on, there's all this food at the kitchen table. Eat as much as you can. And I'm saying to myself, but I'm really not sure. But they grew up in the Depression, and they understood that it was really very, very important to have food because there were times when they didn't have food. So in order to be a healthy and prosperous family, you eat. Eat shows that you're doing very well.
Doctor, how is it in Asia?
Well, coming from India, the perception has always been that if you're thin, you're poor. And obesity or good physical health usually was represented by obesity, which meant that you're prosperous. And this is a fact that gets carried on when the immigrants come to America. And when you eat fast foods, which is very rich in calories, you even get more obese. And the problem is that the major diseases of middle age, diabetes, high blood pressure, cardiovascular disease, and cancer, the major part of the problem is diet. And almost half of these diseases can be prevented by proper diet and reducing weight.
Mm-hmm. Can you recall some case that you encountered, or someone you met as a professional or personal in your personal lives, someone who had they had a better diet, certain things could have been prevented? Somebody you've treated, doctor?
Well, through the community outreach that I do with La Salud Hispana, it's not just one person that I can remember. I mean, there are hundreds and hundreds of people. When we do these community health expos, that we do their blood pressure, and their blood pressure is super high, and they have had a blood pressure most of their life, and they don't realize that they have it because of the obesity issue. We all know that obesity is the leading cause of diabetes, and obesity is the leading cause of cancer, and obesity is the leading cause of heart disease. So unfortunately, obesity It's a big issue of concern to Latinos in this country, and we have to do something about it.
Laura, to every community, to every ethnic community, how important is watching your diet? And then, since we're delving into everybody else's foods, how important is it for us to know each other's food, what's healthy and what isn't, in everybody else's food?
Well, I think one of the greatest things about America, and especially here in New Jersey, is that we have so many different cultures, and we have the opportunity to share culture through food, which I think for many people, that is the way you share. I mean, Lori was talking about what her grandmother was like, and I just had a little smile on my face because we had a very similar thing in our household. My grandmother was Italian, and certainly in Italy, a chubby baby and a chubby child always appeared healthy. But I think the thing that we need to look at is, what's very interesting is that for many cultures, before they come to this country, the diseases that they have here are often not the same as what may have been apparent in their own countries, and that's often because the diet changes a little bit when they emigrate here. For instance, many cultures have more of a plant-based diet. For instance, the Mediterranean diet is very plant-based and also has a lot of olive oil, and inherently that's a healthier diet.
But is it important when we go and test and go to everybody else's cuisine and check out what different restaurants are cooking, is it important for us to know what's good and isn't good for us, and how do we share this information? You're from India. How do I know when I go to an Indian restaurant that I should worry about this dish and maybe not so much about this other dish?
Well, as an Indian, sometimes even then you don't know. And I think education is very important. I think the dietary services in our communities need to address that issue, that every culture needs to be taught about the other cultures, what their good foods are and what their bad foods are. Certain Indian dishes are excellent. Certain Chinese and Japanese dishes are excellent. But on the other hand, there are a lot of dishes from these countries which are very fattening and they're very bad for your health. For example, the Indian sweets are very rich in cholesterol and fat and should be avoided. And then there are dishes like chicken tikka, which are very good for you. They have very little fat. So that understanding, that education is very important.
We have a video here that we're watching, a Chinese restaurant in Belleville, New Jersey, where some of the dishes, here we have an example. I think we're going to look at an example of what a very unhealthy dish that has meat and seafood and all kinds of stuff in it, and as opposed to a more healthier dish, which is what we're looking at now with vegetables and so forth. And that's the difference in each restaurant. And I guess when we go to a Chinese restaurant, we can inquire or we can ask or we can educate ourselves a little better. One of the things that I wanted to bring up with you, though, is young people, because young people see themselves so strong and they feel they can go ahead and for the first 20 years of their youth eat junk food and it's not going to affect them later. Does it come back to haunt them?
Sure, very often it does. I think that's just the whole idea of being young, is that you think you're invincible and you don't believe that what you eat is going to have an effect later on in life. And of course, that's why there are many programs reaching out to families when children are young, because you can influence your children's dietary habits at home and try to impress upon them when they get out into school what they're eating is valuable. It's not an easy task, but it can be done.
So is there a problem, for example, in our communities with one particular, like diabetes, for example, that applies to almost all of the ethnic groups. Why is that a problem that all the different ethnic groups have in common, diabetes? And doctor, I know this is one of your favorite topics, so tell me why it goes across the board.
Well, diabetes type 2 is caused by obesity, and once again, when we eat, we don't really care that eating a lot and eating unhealthy is going to lead us to suffer from diabetes, because the issue that we're facing when it comes to Latinos is that a lot of Latinos have the disease, but more than half of us don't know that we have it. 1 out of every 4 Latinos have diabetes. That translates to 1.8 million people in the United States, and it's killing us.
Is that something that is normally checked up when you go for a regular checkup with your doctor to see whether you have diabetes, or is there a special test that you have to take?
Well, if you have a good physical test every year and you do your blood work, obviously you will detect the disease. The problem with the Latino community, again, is the lack of access to the healthcare system, being uninsured, low in finances, and not being educated as a child that we need prevention in order to find out about these diseases on time and we can treat them on time.
And how important is a diet for pregnant women? In our community, sometimes we don't know enough about that too. And again, we mix, match all kinds of food, and sometimes we don't know what we're really doing. Can you tell me about, especially women who are testing all kinds of food when they're pregnant, not knowing what the ramifications may be?
I think the interesting thing about pregnancy, and for some reason nature worked this out, is oftentimes if the mother is not eating properly, very often it's the mother who will suffer and not the child. However, that's not to say that the woman should not take in a healthful diet. It is very important to make sure, for instance, that when a woman is pregnant, that she's taking in a sufficient number of calories. I think this is an issue that probably does not exist in many of the communities we're talking about. But I would like to impress upon women who may be thinking, oh, it's an opportunity to lose weight, that they don't do that. I think one of the problems is that pregnancy is a time that many women who are obese use to lose weight, which is not something that anybody in the medical community would recommend. So that's one of the things that I've noticed has been a trend recently.
We have a tape. We're going to look at a typical American restaurant now, and there they serve, what we're normally used to eating, mashed potatoes and meat dishes and so forth. And we're going to look at now at a couple of dishes that are being served in this restaurant in Newark, where you see the meat and potatoes dish and the more healthy vegetables and chicken dish, or a chicken salad. Again, how important is it to educate ourselves, doctor? And do the people who not follow the advice, you're a surgeon, you're a heart surgeon?
I'm not actually a surgeon, I'm a cardiologist, but I do go in surgery many times.
Okay, so when you go in surgery, do you end up looking at these operations and wondering, had these people followed my advice 10 years earlier, they wouldn't be here?
Well, it's always the case. It's not only in open heart surgery, but even otherwise when you see your patients. And a large majority of my patients are from the minority groups. You see that they're obese, and you almost know that they will have diabetes or high blood pressure complication in the future. So what we eat is very important, because that is the major preventable cause of these diseases. So it's important that both the physicians and the patients get educated.
What is the cultural significance? Tell us about what you do, because you're a cultural consultant, and how does food work into this?
Well, one of the things that we're doing at the New Jersey Department of Health and Senior Services is that we're working with healthcare providers throughout the state to educate them in terms of how culture impacts on dietary behavior and health behaviors overall. And it's important that whatever we do as practitioners and as healthcare providers, that we understand the cultures of the individuals that we serve, because if we don't, we will not be effective in terms of trying to turn around the healthcare problems that we have within our communities. Culture is embedded in everything we do. It's our value system. It's what we think is important, what we think is right. And when we eat what we eat, that is part of our culture. So it's very, very important that when we're making dietary recommendations and saying that we'd like you to change your eating habits, that we do it in a way that is sensitive, respectful to the individuals that we're speaking with.
Does it make a difference? Can we tell people, look, you can still eat more or less the same food that you like, your traditional family food? If you only would cook it a different way, you can really change things considerably?
I think the key thing to tell people is to reduce the portion size of what they eat. Oftentimes, there are certain ways of cooking that, for certain dishes, there is no way to modify it, or people just love it so much. If you cut down your portion size, that can often make a tremendous difference. In enjoying the food that you like, but just eating less of it.
But in the Hispanic community, for example, you see people cooking rice with lard, because they feel it gives it a better taste. But at the same time, I understand it's very dangerous to do that. It's not healthy. At the same time, we see people using and reusing the oil they use to fry. And again, is that dangerous?
That's not a healthy practice. When I was growing up, I remember my mother actually having the lard on the stove, and she would use it over and over again when she was cooking the fried chicken. And I remember coming home from school, and I said, "Mom, that's not the right thing to do." And she was a little bit taken back, but after a while, it really made sense to her. So I think that one of the things we can do is say to people, we don't want you to change everything about what you eat and how you are. We want you to make some modifications in your diet. So in other words, if you're going to have something like collard greens with ham hocks, instead of having ham hocks in your collard greens, maybe what you can put in your collard greens is turkey, something like that, which is still flavorful. You can bake your chicken in a flavorful manner as opposed to frying it. So there are things you can do that will make things healthy but still taste well.
Well, you know, we found a Hispanic restaurant where they're doing just that. They're cooking some healthy dishes, and let's watch this video.
Nosotros tenemos una variedad de más o menos 130 platos diferentes, pero bregamos con las personas también que tienen problemas de salud, como personas diabéticas y cosas. Para las personas que vienen, que dicen que no pueden comer ningún tipo de carne, pues tenemos lo que es el pescado. En este caso hemos preparado el pescado a base de jugo de limón y ajo. Todo es natural, cebolla, limón, ajo, y en esa manera las personas pueden comer y sentirse bien. Es saludable, muy bueno para la salud. Porque también esto es otra manera como preparamos el pescado. Aquí tenemos diferentes formas, tenemos unas 20 formas de preparar el filete de pescado. Es bueno que se sepa que lo que estamos usando aquí es el pescado pargo, el red snapper como le llaman. Esto aquí está hecho todo natural, nada, no ingredientes de ningún tipo, solamente a la parrilla, no sal, no nada, solamente a la parrilla, completamente para personas que quieran hacer dietas. También les recomendamos mucho a las personas que cuando vayan a comer este tipo de comida, les recomendamos bastante el plátano maduro, porque según los médicos es algo que es muy rico en potasio, muy bueno para el corazón, y nosotros lo recomendamos a las personas. En definitivo, la gente no se cuida en Navidad. Tú sabes que te digo, aparte de todo lo que comen, como el lechón asado, que es algo una tradición muy grande, viene del Caribe, y siempre el lechón asado es lo principal. Después vienen las ensaladas de papa que le agregan huevo, el huevo con un colesterol inmenso, muy alto. A la persona no le importa lo que tenga. El caso es complacer su deseo de comer. En la familia se juntan, allí nadie se preocupa por lo que le puede hacer daño, sino divertirse, aparte de los tragos, el alcohol que le agregan. Es un daño terrible para la salud que nadie se está cuidando ahora mismo.
I tell you, that looks delicious right there, and some of it could be very harmful. And again, how do we educate people? How do we create out of this program? I'd like you guys to continue talking to each other and form some kind of association where we inform each other about each other's foods and about the dangers of each other's food. I don't think that this has ever been discussed the way we're discussing it today.
I agree with you. And one of the things that we're doing at the New Jersey Department of Health and Senior Services is that with co-sponsorship from USDA, we're going to be having a national summit on nutrition, breastfeeding, and cultural competency, eliminating racial disparities in health. What we're saying is there's a very, very important dialogue going on across the country and across the state in reference to racial disparities. We want to eliminate racial disparities in health for all of our diverse populations. But one of the major problems that we have in reference to the diseases that we attack our community relates to nutrition, relates to dietary intake. So what we want to do is to begin using this particular summit as a forum to address and educate about these issues and to develop solutions.
Well, okay, let's talk about some of those solutions. What would you recommend to people who are watching this program about diversity in food? I'd like each one of you to go around and say, look, you know, be careful about this. From now on, think this way when you eat, or don't think this way when you eat. Doctor?
Well, my recommendation to the individuals watching this program, obviously I will never recommend to someone to stop eating what they're eating. I will recommend a little bit of education in what you're eating, and try not to, for example, if you're eating 3 or 4 carbohydrates at the same time, just try to eat one, and like the dietitian said before, cut on the portions of what you're eating. I think that's the basic recommendation, but the answer is education But the fact is that that's not reality. Reality is different.
Laura, deal with the myths and misconceptions, because there are a lot of those about food, right?
There are. I think one of the biggest misconceptions that we have is that we have to really reduce the amount of fat in our diet very low. What we really need to do is reduce a certain type of fat in our diet, and that's saturated fat. You had mentioned lard. You know, when dietitians hear the word lard, it's a little bit of like a shudder, because lard, of course, is higher in saturated fat than any other dietary fat that's used. So you do want to decrease certain types of fat, and in every different culture, there is a certain type of saturated fat. For instance, you know, Danish people eat a lot of hard cheeses, which would be high in fat. Butter is also high in saturated fat. Olive oil, however, is not. That's high in monounsaturated fat. So I think we have to look at the fact that if we can still have a diet that's tasty, just change a little bit, as Lori was talking about, of the type of ingredients that we're using and the way we cook.
Doctor, from your perspective, what should we do to make sure that we don't have heart problems, we don't end up on your table?
Well, I think the education in the minorities is very important, because they suffer disproportionately high incidence of coronary artery disease and heart attacks and diabetes. I believe that community health centers and healthcare providers really need to be educated on which are the main foods that different communities eat, and what are the healthy foods and what are the unhealthy foods, so they can teach their patients. And I believe the American Dietetic Association, maybe the American Diabetic Association and the American Heart Association can play a major role at a central level in disseminating this information. And maybe the Restaurant Association can put up, even in the menus or somewhere on the wall, put up what are the healthy foods in their restaurant. And I believe this has to be on from different fronts. We need to educate each other, because I have no idea what is healthy food in Mexican food and what is healthy food in maybe Cuban foods, and vice versa.
I can tell you about the Cuban food. So you tell me about Indian and I'll tell you about Cuban. Lori, how important is exercise? I mean, we have to take that into account, in the fact that, you know, in Latin America, we may have a certain diet, and maybe we do things different there. We live a different way. In the Caribbean, we exercise more, we walk more, we're out in the sun more. So maybe the diet doesn't affect us the same way that it affects us here when we stay home because it's snowing outside.
Right. Well, I think it's very, very important that as we're talking about dietary intake and changing that we must couple that with good physical activities. And in many communities of color, one of the things we're finding, if you look at the surveys and the research, is that physical activity is a problem. But I think that there's some very, very exciting ways in which we can get communities exercising and being excited about physical activities. There are models across the country that you can do salsa dancing, you can have rap music playing, and you can exercise that way. So I think that education is extraordinarily important, but we must make sure that the education that we're providing is culturally appropriate education, so that it's working, because just getting information to people doesn't make people change. It's got to relate to who they are. And that makes the difference.
But doctor, do you see that coming from, you're from Colombia, from South America, do you see people coming with certain dietary habits that don't apply the same way here once they get here? Well, a certain, you know, in Colombia, you know, you can have a very, very heavy lunch, whereas here, you know, you try not to have a big, heavy lunch as a meal.
Exactly.
There's certain cultural things that you bring with you that sometimes you change and sometimes you don't change, and then it makes you fat.
Definitely, and one of the things that it changes drastically with new immigrants is exercise. If you are coming from Colombia, not only your eating habits are different, but also your activity. You might not have a car in Colombia, so you do a lot of walking. You come here and all you do is driving a car back and forth from one place to the other. So that obviously is a big factor for you to become obese.
So how important is it, Laura, for us to be looking at each other's food and each other's culture? And, you know, insurance rates keep going up, and we have to take care of that somehow. We have to be healthier. And if we're going to be healthier, diet, and you're a dietitian, is very important. So how do we form some kind of program, not only in New Jersey, but national, that teaches people about each other's food?
Well, I think those type of programs do start at the grassroots level, where in your own community, which many of us, of course, in New Jersey live in very diverse communities, is reach out to people in your neighborhood who come from different cultures. And I think you can share that way. And to me, there is no better way than sharing than through food. That is just the basis for many, many cultures.
In fact, Dr. Rodrigo Cárdenas, this is his magazine, La Salud Hispana, was telling me that in a future edition, maybe we'll do a whole, he'll do a whole presentation here, a whole article about the diversity in food, which is something, I hope you give us credit because it's something we're starting here on this program. But I think it's very, very important for this to get some more recognition. You know, again, over and over again, I suffer from migraine headaches, for example. And I know people tell me that there are certain things that those of us who suffer from migraine headaches can, certain things in Chinese food, for example. Mm-hmm. Are you aware of this? Tell me about it, please. This is my free consultation.
Well, I mean, obviously, it's saying in the community that if you have a lot of chocolate, it's not recommended for someone who suffers migraine headaches. I mean, in the Chinese community, obviously, they have different teas that they use to solve the problem. But I also wanted to quickly add, Miguel, that it's very difficult to change my father, who's 65 years old, dietary habits, but it's easier to change it at a younger age.